All aboard your Tech and Games caboose. We have some Division 2 beta benchmarks we're testing out, some practice for that, and we have a couple tech news topics at the end. But let's start off with the GTX 1060 versus 1660 Ti versus 2060 benchmark for some PvP. So we have a little spreadsheet here showing the different cards. This system's an 8700K processor, Asus Z370i motherboard, and all the specs right there. And we have about a 5% overclock on all three of the cards from EVGA. There's two for the XC versions, and the 1060 is MSI overclock edition, which had about a 3% pre-overclock, and then we added about 2% more, so about 5% on all. So pretty good. And then we're using a DX12 with the off. So basically we have a little graph here we made really quick. So basically we are comparing the three cards from medium settings to ultra settings. So you'll basically get around 60 FPS on all the cards, but if you're looking for like FPS 120 gaming, you'll probably want to check out some of these numbers. So we did the PvP benchmark in the 4 versus 4 mode. This was on day 2 yesterday. And we got on the Stadium map, which had a little bit more FPS than the Capital, the greenery map with some ruins and stuff. So basically what we are seeing here is the 1060 had an average score of 84 FPS versus the 1660 Ti's 105 FPS, which is about a 19% increase in FPS. And we have a couple of screenshots, no video. We'll work on adding some video. But the GPU on the 1060 was around 79 degrees, 99% usage, and it clocked around 1860 on the boost. So, and then we're seeing around 5000 on the memory clock throughout most of the tests. So here is some closer pictures, and basically we're seeing, again, CPU clocked at 5000, 5 gigahertz, and the FPS is around 87-ish, and then it goes down a little bit. And we also have some other interesting things, about 10 gigs of RAM while the game's running, GPU usage 99, and the temperature around 79. And that's compared to the 1660 Ti, which boosted around at 1995 megahertz for the boost clock, and it got around 2010, so it went up and down about 15 to 20 or so. So pretty interesting results. And this one was at 71 degrees, so pretty good there, pretty low on the temperature. So, and then we're jumping up to the 2060. So we go from 105 on the 1660 average to 125 FPS. This is the on Ultra again. And this is about a, 84 to 105 was 24%, 25%. And then 105 to 125 is about a 19% lift again. So we see a good performance increase. And what do we have here for some numbers? The 2060 RTX was around 79 degrees and it boosted up to 2025. So the boost clock was pretty high here, and it stayed around 2025 throughout the testing. And the memory clock again was around 5000 on all the tests. So that was pretty good. So MSRP is around 350 for the 2060, and that's around what we actually purchased it for, and then 2080 for the 1660 Ti, and then 2050 MSRP for the 1060, but it's around 210 or so for the price today. So pretty interesting. 60 FPS again, you can pretty much hit that with all the cards, with all the settings, even on Ultra. But if you're looking at 120 FPS, you will want to be looking at the 2060, which had 125 FPS average in the Ultra settings. Otherwise, you probably want to jump down to the medium settings on a 1660 Ti if you have a 120 Hz monitor and you're trying to boost to get that max frame rate. So you probably want to look at that. And again, this was on the Stadium map for all the 6 tests. And on the Capital Ruins, we saw a 24 FPS drop. There was a lot more greenery, a lot more trees, a lot more detail and everything going on. So, and also the fights actually lasted a lot longer because there wasn't too much elevation, which we'll talk about in a minute. But basically, for the Capital Ruins map, this is on Ultra for the RTX 2060. We got around 100 FPS. And the memory was a little bit less used. It was around 4600 versus 5000 on the others. So just as something interesting we noticed, and around 2010 on the core clock, on the boost clock, excuse me. And some other things we saw, GPU temperatures around 81 on the Ruins map, and not too many other details, but pretty interesting for graphics card test results. So also with the 4v4, basically the maps, the stadium map, they had a rooftop elevation. So once you got up to the rooftop, it got pretty difficult to take it back if you weren't organized and you weren't using your skills correctly. You had different, you could send out a drone, and you could also do like a little rolly ball that would target stuff, and also a little turret you could throw down, and that could help you get back on high ground. But otherwise it was pretty difficult in the PvP for the 4v4 to get back on top, where the Capitol Ruins, the fighting actually lasted up to like a minute in certain cases, where when I was benchmarking on the stadium map, you could only really benchmark for about 30 seconds of actual fighting and shooting and actual explosions going on to get some tough benchmarks for you guys. So pretty interesting. The weapons were all pretty decent. There was a lot of bonuses you could add and combined to. It was pretty balanced for stat wise. It was supposed to be stat wise pretty balanced comparing to other people versus like the dark zones where you had a little bit more advantage for gear. So basically you just had to pick out the better weapons and go at some PvP basically. So those are your results. We did some testing for the beta. We'll probably be doing another test for the launch of the game, as well as if they have a driver update potentially within the first week. If it says like 10 to 20% FPS increase, we'll do a second little benchmark on that. But this little PC spreadsheet will be in the link below if you want to check it out for updates in the future, and we could see some other things. Also, one other mention about the benchmark: the game launched in 57 seconds on average, and then once you were in the game, once you were in the login screen to play your character, it would take about 17 or so seconds to get in the game. Just something extra we tested and we'll be watching. And this was on the GeForce 419 driver, 419.17 drivers, Windows 10, and the drives were Samsung PM961s, so similar to the 960. It's an NVMe drive, around 3000 megabyte read, so pretty quick speeds for launching games potentially. So there is that for the game news, and we have a couple of tech news topics I guess we can jump into. That's pretty much all the benchmarking we have. So for quick little tech news, we have AMD next gen Radeon GPUs to feature variable refresh rate, variable rate shading for faster frame rates. So it may launch with the RX Navi graphics cards. So this is pretty interesting for AMD fans. You'll get pretty hyped for this. So we got a little bit of explanation about variable rate shading, VRS. It's found by Tom's Hardware. And benefits are basically it can help improve FPS by rendering at different rates, different frames in a way a little bit. And this can be coupled with eye tracking, which is one of the big things for VR headsets moving forward, to actually get the higher FPS that's needed to run games smooth and not cause people to get sick and everything, and it just to be stuttering. So this can actually be coupled with eye tracking. There's some Tobii eye tracking modules that you can get, I believe, for the Division 1 and 2, which do some interesting things for the gaming, but not quite rendering yet. So basically it will watch where you're looking and can actually render a lower resolution around where you're pointing your eyes at. So you could get a higher FPS boost, up to 50% in certain areas. So specifically on Wolfenstein, it says 50% for the GTX. Switching over to NVIDIA news from AMD really quick, they use some different adaptive shading to render things a little differently, and they get a 50% boost in Wolfenstein too. So pretty interesting. And if AMD jumps on the bandwagon, then basically more games will be able to develop this for both sides, and we'll potentially get to see this in some games in the future, like mainstream titles and stuff, besides just Wolfenstein 2, which pretty good game as well. So pretty cool for AMD fans. And we have other AMD leaks. This is a little bit more of a leak with alleged specs and prices for the AMD Ryzen 3000 series Zen 2. So basically this is all super early and none of it's confirmed, but this is leaked by a retailer. So we get to see the Ryzen 3850X with 16 cores at $560. So this would be competing with the i9 9900K, which is around the same. I think you might be able to get a couple $30 or so discounts on this, I think now, depending on the site. But basically, we also have a 12-core, the 3700X at $370, which would utterly destroy an 8-core 9900K, potentially, depending on the results we saw at CES. And then we have the Ryzen 5 3600X with 8 cores at $260. And here is the from the leaked from BizGram Asia. So pretty interesting. Where is the AMD Ryzen motherboards? CPUs are somewhere around here. Here's Ryzen and Threadripper, and here's a 3850X. So get hyped for some really good offerings from AMD. They do really well on CPUs. GPU wise, they're not competing in the last couple years. They're putting out a graphics card here or there, but not too much on the GPU front, but crushing it in CPU price to performance. So pretty good there. And that's about all the tech news and game benchmarks we have. We have Lulu with a smiley face and Mark saying smooth back to you and some thumbs up. Cool. We will have another episode tomorrow at 1 p.m. Pacific with some more tech and game news and maybe a benchmark or two. But with that, we will be signing out. Pew, 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 pew.